May it please the court. Mr. Chief Justice, Justices of the Supreme Court, I would like to briefly start today's arguments just describing the important and tremendous significance of Mauna Kea to the Hawaiian people. Mauna Kea is more than a mountain, it is the embodiment of the Hawaiian people. Mauna Kea Kuahiwi, Kuhao Ka Malie. Mauna Kea is an astonishing mountain that stands in the calm. Mary Kavena Pukui, 1983. It's an old saying that expresses the sentiment among the Hawaiian people that Mauna Kea is a source of awe and inspiration. This is, as the court is well aware, one of the most significant and important cultural sites in Hawaii. It is a source of the genealogical story of the Hawaiian people, of Papa and Wakea, the creation story. This is the source, this is the piko, this is the beginning for Hawaiian people, for Hawaiian society, for Hawaiian culture. This is the source. Mauna Kea has really become an absolute mess. It's there's been significant adverse impact that's been found. We have what is essentially an industrial center up on top of the conservation district on the summit of Mauna Kea. And this has been going on for many years. It has been the source of scathing audits by the state auditors. I would submit to the court it is a situation that is out of hand. The governor has, as the court is probably aware, recently spoke about the need for better management on Mauna Kea. He has come out with a variety of points that he needs to be addressed, including needing to be better stewards on the mountain. With respect to the 8 administrative standards that are codified in the rules that must be met in order for a conservation district use permit to be granted. And again, it's undisputed that the cumulative effects of astronomical development and other uses in the summit area of Mauna Kea have previously resulted in impacts that are significant and adverse. That's already established. But what University of Hawaii did as far as so-called mitigation is that they came up with community benefit packages, workforce, projects, some scholarship funds for the community, nothing that dealt with the impact itself in the conservation district. And that's...
Could I interrupt you? You've mentioned that there's a determination that's an official determination at this point that there really isn't a substantial adverse impact, correct?
Yeah, it's
at this point.
Yes.
That idea that there's no substantial adverse impact seems to be based on this approach which you've described as sort of incremental degradation, that the mountain, albeit a significant cultural resource at some point, has been degraded significantly to the point that now it's, with the addition of the telescope, not true to say that there is a substantial adverse impact on the culture, correct? That's the position that's being taken. So if that is the case, Mr. Werdeman, I'm interested in your explanation for how is it that it appears from the testimony of Mr. White and Mr. Hayes, the individuals that put together the conservation use permit, as well as the EIS, the cultural section, their view is that there's been this incremental degradation because of, and there's a list in the cultural section of 21 different actions that have taken place over time, including building telescopes and roads, that according to the testimony of Mr. Hayes anyways, means that the mountain has now been degraded to the point where the addition of a telescope isn't significant.
What the university is proposing, or is arguing in all of this, is really that it's already a mess up there. What's a little bit more of a mess?
And Mr.
We can't incrementally, I'm sorry,
Oh, no, finish. Please finish. I'm sorry.
incrementally continue to build and build and build up there just because there's a finding of substantial adverse impact. This is a conservation district. This is not an industrial district. This is a conservation district where preserving natural resources is significant, and that's what the legislature has found. And what the university and what the state administration needs to do is start addressing the problem, not continue to add to it.
The author of the application, Mr. Perry White, testified, was asked this question, how can you say that it's not substantial? And one of the things that he pointed to was that there was an expectation some telescopes would be decommissioned and that there would be a rolling back, and that when one considers that over time some of the telescopes would be decommissioned, we felt that it was on balance not a bad thing. In your view, in the position of the appellants, what should be done, or are there any combination of conditions that would allow the construction of this telescope, or is it because of the nature of what's already on the mountain, it's precluded as a matter of law in your view?
Well, certainly as it stands today, the telescope should not be built or should not be allowed to be built whatsoever.
The ultimate final decision of the board granting the Conservation District use permit represents the culmination of a process of years of community outreach, of dialogue, of listening, revising, reducing, modifying, mitigating, conditioning to a degree that is unprecedented in the history of astronomy on Mauna Kea. We haven't gotten to speak since I've been up here on this issue of existing impacts, and I think.
Now, thank you. Could I ask your view? I'd asked Mr. Werdeman as well in terms of existing impacts. Would it be your understanding that the analysis that was developed in the final EIS by Parsons Brinkerhoff has to do with the idea that there's an incremental degradation of the mountain that's happened to such a degree that there's a substantial adverse impact on the cultural resource as it stands now? Would you agree with that?
The EIS says that the existing conditions are the existing impacts from historical activity on the mountain.
But applying, are they
significant, adverse, and significant.
Having found that there's a substantial, significant, and adverse impact on the cultural resource, it says, in general, the project will add a limited increment to the level of cumulative impact, but will not tip the balance. That's what I was going to try to get your thoughts on. Will not tip the balance of any specific cumulative impact from a less than significant level to a significant level. So my question was, how did they calculate this tipping on the balance? It's a little unclear to me.
13530C4 says the proposed land use, not things that have happened before plus the proposed land use, will not cause substantial adverse impact to existing natural resources, not to natural resources as at some past pristine point in history may have existed, to existing natural resources within the surrounding area, community, or region.
And then they found, like the analysis in the final EIS, that the telescope doesn't make that much difference. It might mean that there's an incremental increase in the adverse impact, but it's not so significant that it could be considered by itself substantial. I think that was the analysis. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think the reason that the board got there was because it looked at the very, very, very extensive mitigation measures that had been undertaken here, starting with the location of the project. Again, this is a project that went through the design of the project has gone through enormous modification, reduction.
Oh, I don't disagree that mitigation became important. I'm just interested in your thoughts about the underlying analysis, that the incremental degradation was so great that a telescope wouldn't make a difference. I don't know if you've seen this interesting exhibit that was to the management plan, but figure 5.1 has identified the historic properties that are within the management area, which is quite a large area, and obviously includes the Mauna Kea Science Reserve. But even within the Mauna Kea Science Reserve, there are hundreds of historic properties, which apparently were not considered to be significant historic properties, but nonetheless, the idea that you have this sort of open space that doesn't have any significance.
In that 11,000 plus acres, you've got 263 identified historical properties. You've got a 525 acre astronomy precinct. Within the astronomy precinct, I think you've got 7 or 8 or 9 historic properties. Within the project area, you have the nearest historic site.
But we're sort of saying the same thing. When you look at it, you can narrow it to just the Science Reserve. You can look at the mountain as a whole, but the choice of Parsons-Brinkerhoff was to look at it in a certain way that developed the theory of, in their view, in accordance with the law, but developed the theory of this incremental degradation.
The assessment of cultural impacts here, of impact on cultural practices, was in no way dependent upon the existence of pre-existing impacts on the mountain. Because if there's a determination that there are no cultural practices in the project areas, the state of things elsewhere on the mountain, frankly, just doesn't come into play.
Could you help me? How did this balance take place?
The 8 criteria by which the land board considers.
Well, I'm focusing on criteria 4, right?
But all of the criteria, it's a discretionary board permit. It's not mandatory, and so what the board did is it looked at what was presented in the evidence, and let's see. Significantly, it seemed they recognized, after looking at the FEIS as well as all of the other documents that are listed that they reviewed, they found that significantly having 13 telescopes would not be substantially different from having 12 on the mountain. And I think the board's finding that this impact made it less than substantial is not clearly erroneous.
What's happening in this proposed project is they're actually extending the footprint now of all of the telescopes that are there to an area on the north plain, just below the summit, which is extending it now further and further up on the mountain and away from the summit. So it's certainly, there were substantial testimony about view planes. There is also the sighting of the largest number of archaeological sites being near that area. These are the types of things that need to be corrected to be in line with 183C1. You got this mess on Mauna Kea. As I stated earlier, there was a subject of state audits about the mess up there, the governor's comments that we need to be better stewards of Mauna Kea, and those types of remedial efforts need to be made, and with that, then we would submit when it is less than substantial and adverse, if it ever becomes such, with decommissioning and removal of the telescopes, then it may become an issue for consideration. But at this point, it's not, and we shouldn't continue to degrade. Otherwise, it'll never end. We'll have 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 20, 25 telescopes up there with the same argument.